At 01:57 in the morning, 9 Ukrainian drones crossed the Volgograd city outskirts from the northeast at 12 meters altitude, and the operation that Captain Yaryna Voloshyna had spent 8 weeks building is not aimed at the building everyone will see burning. It is aimed at the basement. The FSB building on Popova Street in Volgograd City, a multi-story Soviet-era administrative complex, 27 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, 7 kilometers from the Kharkivska Hill residential district, in the center of a city that had been struck repeatedly since the full-scale invasion began, will be on fire by 02:15. Excelenova Plus will publish the footage. RBC Ukraine will report secondary explosions. The Belgorod Oblast operational headquarters will post that a residential building and 15 cars are burning. 12 people will be injured. The city center will lose power. None of that is the operation. The operation is in the basement, and in the rear service entrance on the building's eastern face, and in the ventilation intake on the eastern wall, and in the fiber junction box on the northeast corner. 4 targets that will appear in no telegram post, no OSINT channel, no monitoring report. 4 targets whose destruction will be attributed to the same strike that produced the visible fire, because they are in the same building, reached by the same drones, burning in the same smoke column that Al Jazeera will film and the Kyiv Independent will publish, and 12 injured residents of Volgograd City will remember for reasons that have nothing to do with a targeting intelligence server room in a basement. The Volgograd FSB building is not just an FSB building. Voloshyna had understood this since week 3. The vehicle pattern had told her. 8 weeks of satellite imagery passes over the FSB complex had produced a consistent observation that no previous analysis had noted, because previous analyses had been focused on the building's front entrance on Popova Street, the entrance that FSB personnel used, the entrance that was consistent with an FSB building's function. The rear service entrance on the eastern face was a different picture. The rear service entrance showed a rotation of vehicles from 3 distinct organizational markings: FSB plates, GRU plates, and 20th Combined Arms Army tactical vehicle markings, arriving at irregular intervals, staying for between 1 and 3 hours, and departing on a cycle that Voloshyna had cross-referenced against Russian artillery firing patterns in the Kharkiv direction. The vehicles from 3 organizations were using the same entrance to the same basement at intervals that corresponded to the targeting cycle. The FSB vehicles arrived with source reports, human intelligence from occupied territory and from infiltration networks in Ukrainian-held Kharkiv Oblast. The GRU vehicles arrived with signals intelligence products, intercept data from Ukrainian military communications. The 20th Combined Arms Army vehicles arrived with reconnaissance imagery and forward observation reports from the Kharkiv direction front line. All 3 organizations' products entered the basement. 1 consolidated targeting package exited, transmitted through the fiber conduit on the northeast corner to the artillery command that would turn it into strike authorizations within the next 24 hours. She had confirmed the function in week 3 from signals intelligence. The encrypted communications traffic from the FSB complex's basement level showed a traffic pattern that was distinct from the building's upper floors. The upper floors generated FSB operational communications, administrative traffic, the standard emissions of an intelligence organization's headquarters function. The basement generated something different. The data flows between the 3 organizations' networks, the timing, the volume, the directionality, matched a joint intelligence fusion center, specifically the fusion center pattern for a targeting coordination function, where raw intelligence from multiple sources was consolidated into a targeting product and transmitted downstream to a consumer who needed it on a specific cycle. The consumer was the Kharkiv Direction Artillery Command. The cycle was 24 hours. The product was the set of targeting coordinates that told Russian artillery where to aim. Every Russian artillery strike on Kharkiv, every S-300 missile fired at a residential building, every glide bomb released from a Su-34 above the cloud layer, every Tornado S rocket aimed at a Ukrainian defensive position in the northern Kharkiv Oblast, had its targeting coordinates compiled in this basement before it was authorized. The Volgograd FSB building was not just an FSB building. It was the place where Russia decided what to hit in Kharkiv. Voloshyna had filed the assessment in week 5. Joint Intelligence Coordination Center for Kharkiv Direction, confirmed in FSB complex basement. Vehicle pattern from 3 organizations confirmed from satellite imagery. Signals traffic pattern consistent with targeting fusion function confirmed from collection data. 15-minute backup transfer protocol identified from communications timing analysis. Automatic activation when external communications lost. Data transferred in priority order to secondary facility at Volgograd 80 km south. Strike before transfer completes. Destroys active targeting queue. Request authorization. Response. Strike on FSB facility in Russian Federation territory. Requires specific political authorization pathway above current targeting cell level. Continue monitoring. She had expected the response. She had also expected that the political authorization pathway had already been navigated, because the Belgorod FSB building had been identified as a target in previous operations, and the umbrella authorization covering FSB-associated facilities in Belgorod Oblast from a previous approval cycle was on the record. The targeting cell had not checked against the umbrella authorization before responding. She checked. The umbrella authorization covered it. She filed the cross-reference in week 6. Authorization confirmed on the same day. Operation Thursday. Launched the night of July 26th to 27th. The 9 drones split into 2 cells after crossing the Belgorod outskirts. The first cell of 6 was assigned to the FSB building's upper section, the visible strike, the fire, the secondary explosions, the footage. The second cell of 3 was assigned to the rear service entrance, the ventilation intake, and the fiber junction box, the invisible strike, the basement, the server room, the targeting queue. The first cell approached from the northeast on its attack bearing. The second cell used the first cell's approach as cover, following 3 seconds behind, separated in altitude by 4 meters, presenting to any radar as a single formation, rather than 2 distinct packages. The northeastern approach had been chosen because every previous Ukrainian strike on Belgorod had come from the west or southwest, the direction of Ukrainian-held territory. Belgorod's air defense had been repositioned after the July 4th strike to cover the western and southwestern arcs. The northeastern approach, from the direction of Shebekino district, added 8 minutes to the package's routing, but arrived at the FSB building from the bearing that no previous strike had used and no repositioned battery was covering. Minute 0:0157. The 9 drones crossed the city outskirts at 12 meters altitude, below Belgorod's urban air defense radar coverage floor at this altitude, over the city's northeastern residential blocks. The residents of Kharkivska Hill who were awake at 0157 heard a low buzzing that some described as sounding like an agricultural drone. Several posted the sound to Telegram. None of them were aware they were describing the approach of a drone package that would darken their neighborhood within 20 minutes. The Pantsir S1 battery on the city's northwestern approach was scanning its primary coverage arc, west, southwest, west-northwest. The northeastern arc was covered by the battery's secondary radar at reduced sensitivity. The battery acquired incoming contacts on the northeastern bearing at minute 1 and 8 seconds. 6 contacts in the lead formation, 4 meters above the trailing formation, all bearing southwest toward the city center. The battery commander fired 3 57E6 missiles. The lead formation spread immediately, each of the 6 first cell drones banking to a slightly different bearing toward its assigned aim point on the FSB building's upper section. 3 missiles engaged 3 targets. 2 drones were destroyed before reaching the building. 4 continued. Minute 1. 14 minutes remaining. The Tor M2 battery at the Southern Industrial Zone received the Pantsir S1's contact report at minute 1 and 20 seconds. The unit commander ordered movement toward an engagement position covering the northeastern approach. Movement time from the Tor M2's staging position, 11 minutes. The drones would be at the target in 90 seconds. Minute 2, 13 minutes remaining. 4 drones of the first cell reached the FSB building's upper section at minute 2. The assigned aim points were the rooftop communications infrastructure, the third-floor communications room, whose window configuration had been identified from satellite imagery as distinct from the administrative floors above and below it, the external power supply connection on the building's western face, and the vehicle yard on the building's southern side where the FSB's operational vehicles were parked. All 4 drones struck within 11 seconds of each other. The rooftop communications installation, antennae, satellite receivers, microwave relay equipment, was destroyed by the first drone. The third-floor communications room was struck by the second drone, the warhead penetrating through the window and detonating inside the room. The secondary explosions that telegram monitoring channels would attribute to ammunition or communications equipment were the third-floor room's UPS battery bank, uninterruptible power supply systems for the communications equipment, whose lithium battery chemistry produced the secondary detonation that sounded like small arms ammunition to residents outside the building. The external power connection was destroyed by the third drone. The vehicle yard fire, the 15 cars burning that the Belgorod Oblast operational headquarters would describe, was the fourth drone strike on the parked vehicle pool. The power outage across Kharkivska Hill and the city center happened at minute 2 and 7 seconds, when the external power connection to the building, which served as the distribution point for a section of the city grid running through the FSB complex's substation, was severed. The substation's failure cascaded to the residential grid section it served. The visible strike was complete at minute 2 and 11 seconds. The second cell was at the rear service entrance. Minute 2 and 30 seconds. The three drones of the second cell reached the FSB complex's eastern face at minute 2 and 30 seconds. The northeastern approach had brought them along the building's northern axis before the final turn to the eastern face, arriving at the rear service entrance from an angle that the first cell's approach had not covered, and that the Pantsir S1's engagement had not addressed. The rear service entrance was a reinforced steel door at ground level on the building's eastern wall, the entrance through which the GRU, FSB, and 20th Combined Arms Army vehicles had been arriving and departing for 8 weeks of satellite imagery passes. The door's reinforcement was visible in the imagery as a double-thickness frame and a surface-mounted security control panel. The lead drone of the second cell struck the door directly at its locking mechanism, the point where the reinforced door met the frame, where the blast force would be most efficiently directed into the door's interior. The warhead detonated against the lock housing. The door was penetrated. The blast propagated into the entrance corridor behind it. The second drone struck the ventilation intake on the eastern wall at minute 2 and 35 seconds. A ground-level installation 60 centimeters wide, the air supply system for the basement level's server room and communications equipment. The blast destroyed the intake housing and the first section of ductwork behind it. The basement server room's cooling system lost its primary air supply. The third drone struck the fiber junction box on the building's northeast corner at minute 2 and 40 seconds. The junction box, above ground, mounted on the building's exterior at street level, housing the fiber optic connections between the basement coordination center and the three organizations' wider networks, was destroyed. The fiber connections to the GRU network, the FSB network, and the 20th Combined Arms Army's reconnaissance reporting system were severed simultaneously. Minute 3. 12 minutes remaining. The Basement Joint Intelligence Coordination Center lost its external communications at minute 2 and 40 seconds. The duty officer at the center, a GRU major whose shift had started at midnight, registered the simultaneous loss of all three external network connections and activated the backup transfer protocol at minute 3 and 12 seconds. The backup transfer protocol was the standing order response to a communications failure event at the primary coordination facility. It initiated an automatic data transfer of the active targeting queue to the secondary coordination facility at Veluki, 80 kilometers south, through a cellular data backup connection that was independent of the severed fiber infrastructure. The transfer moved data in priority order, the highest priority targeting packages first, working down through the active queue. The protocol's design assumption was that it would have 15 minutes before the situation at the primary facility deteriorated beyond the point of continued operation. 15 minutes of cellular backup transfer at the available bandwidth would move approximately 48% of the active queue. The design assumption did not account for the ventilation intake destruction. The server room's cooling system had lost its primary air supply at minute 2 and 35 seconds, 37 seconds before the backup transfer began. The server room's thermal load, the heat generated by the processing equipment running at full capacity to compile the active targeting queue, was being managed by the residual air volume in the room's ductwork and by the cooling equipment's continued operation on its existing refrigerant cycle. Without fresh air supply, The ductwork's residual volume would be exhausted within 4 to 6 minutes, and the cooling equipment would begin losing efficiency as the ambient temperature rose. The GRU major initiating the backup transfer did not know the ventilation intake had been destroyed. The backup transfer began at minute 3 and 12 seconds. The server room was already heating. Minute 4, 11 minutes remaining. The backup transfer was running. The cellular connection was transmitting. Priority 1 packages. The targeting coordinates for the 12 highest value targets in the current Kharkiv direction cycle, transferred in the first 40 seconds. Priority 2 packages. The 63 secondary targets began transferring at minute 3 and 52 seconds. The server room ambient temperature reached 28 degrees Celsius at minute 4, 6 degrees above its normal operating range. The cooling equipment was still functioning but losing efficiency. The processing equipment's thermal sensors began logging elevated readings. Outside the building, the Belgorod Oblast Emergency Services had received their first calls at minute 2 and 15 seconds. The fire brigade dispatched from the central station was 4 minutes away. The first unit would arrive at minute 6. Minute 5, 10 minutes remaining. The server room ambient temperature reached 34 degrees Celsius at minute 5. The processing equipment's thermal management system began throttling the processor speeds to reduce heat generation, a protective response that also reduced the processing capacity available for the backup transfer. The transfer rate dropped by approximately 22% as the processors throttled. At the reduced rate, the remaining active queue data would require 11 minutes to transfer. The backup transfer protocol had 10 minutes remaining in its window. The math had changed. The GRU major received a thermal alert from the server room monitoring system at minute 5 and 14 seconds. He called the building's facility management. No answer. The facility management office was on the second floor, in the section struck by the first cell at minute 2. Minute 6, 9 minutes remaining. The server room ambient temperature reached 41 degrees Celsius at minute 6 and 22 seconds. The primary processing unit's thermal shutdown threshold was 43 degrees. The cooling equipment had stopped producing net cooling. It was running, but generating more heat from its own operation than it was removing from the room. The ambient temperature was rising faster. The backup transfer had been running for 3 minutes and 10 seconds. 31% of the active targeting queue had transferred to Volgograd. The primary processing unit reached 43 degrees at minute 6 and 44 seconds. Thermal shutdown activated. The server room's primary system went offline. The backup transfer connection terminated. 69% of the active targeting queue, the reconnaissance products, the coordinate packages, the strike authorization requests for the next 24 hours of Russian artillery operations in the Kharkiv direction, was in a server room in Belgorod, whose primary processing system had just shut down due to thermal overload from a ventilation intake that had been destroyed by a drone warhead 4 minutes and 9 seconds earlier. Minute 7, 8 minutes remaining. The Tor M2 battery arrived at its engagement position at minute 11, 4 minutes before the 15-minute transfer window closed, but 4 minutes and 16 seconds after the server room had shut down and the transfer had stopped. The battery scanned the northeastern approach and the building's eastern face. No contacts. The second cell's 3 drones had completed their attack runs at minute 2 and 40 seconds, and had been egressing northeast for 8 minutes, below the Tor M2's radar coverage floor at 12 meters altitude. The battery commander reported the FSB building on fire, upper section burning, rear service entrance damaged. He could see the fiber junction box destruction on the northeast corner from his engagement position. A street-level installation, its conduit separated from the building's exterior. He did not know what the junction box connected to. He reported infrastructure damage and requested engineering assessment. Minute 15, 0. The backup transfer window closed. 31% transferred. 69% in a server room in Belgorod with no cooling, no external communications, and a primary processing unit in thermal shutdown. The Volgograd secondary facility received the 31% transfer, the 12 highest priority targets, and a portion of the secondary target list. The facility's duty officer began reconstitution procedures, contacting the 3 organizations' Belgorod representatives, establishing communications with the forward observation posts in the Kharkiv direction. beginning the process of rebuilding the 69% from the raw intelligence sources that had fed into the Belgorod Center's compilation process. Estimated reconstitution time, 48 to 72 hours. For 48 to 72 hours, the 20th Combined Arms Army's artillery targeting cell in the Kharkiv direction received no new consolidated targeting packages from the coordination function. The targeting data it had, the 31% that had transferred, was old. The coordinates it contained were from the previous cycle. Ukrainian forces had moved from many of those positions in the standard tactical rotation that Kharkiv direction units practiced after any targeting cycle. Russian artillery in the Kharkiv direction fired on old coordinates for 48 to 72 hours. The positions it targeted had been vacated. The substations it aimed at had already been partially repaired or rerouted. The defensive positions it struck had been rotated away. The General Staff statement confirming the July 27 Belgorod strike described the operation as part of efforts to reduce Russia's military and economic potential in the war against Ukraine. It confirmed the FSB building fire. It confirmed the power outage. It confirmed the secondary explosions. It did not mention the basement. It did not mention the rear service entrance. It did not mention the fiber junction box on the northeast corner, or the ventilation intake on the eastern wall, or the server room's thermal shutdown, or the 31% that transferred, and the 69% that did not. Those details were Voloshina's. The vehicle pattern from 3 organizations at a rear service entrance that everyone else had been reading as an FSB building. The signals traffic from a basement that looked like a targeting fusion center to someone who knew what targeting fusion traffic looked like. The umbrella authorization that the targeting cell had not checked before telling her the political pathway was too complicated. The ventilation intake that made the 15-minute backup transfer protocol a 4-minute problem. Russia had located its Joint Intelligence Coordination Center for the Kharkiv direction in the basement of the Belgorod FSB building, because the FSB building had the physical security, the communications infrastructure, and the organizational cover to host a joint function without advertising it, and because Belgorod city was 27 kilometers from the Ukrainian border and had been struck repeatedly, without any strike ever reaching a basement-level coordination function that satellite imagery showed only as a rear service entrance with a consistent vehicle rotation from 3 organizational markings. Captain Yaryna Voloshina spent 8 weeks reading that vehicle rotation until the 3 organizational markings told her what the basement was for, and the signals traffic confirmed it, and the umbrella authorization resolved the political pathway, and the ventilation intake on the eastern wall was the reason 69% of Russia's Kharkiv direction targeting queue for the next 24 hours was in a server room that had stopped working before the 15-minute backup transfer could save it.